The arms industry is a unique industry. It's not like making shoes or apparel. It's not like selling watches. You're selling things that are, when used properly, kill other people. They're deadly weapons that we have. We've accumulated the technology by the taxpayer paying for this. So we have helicopters, planes, guided missiles. We're able to refuel planes. It is not a jobs program and is not something that we willy-nilly give weapons to everyone. So we don't sell weapons to Russia. We don't sell weapons to China because we have disagreements and we don't think it would be in our best interest to sell them weapons. We also don't sell weapons typically to people we think are untrustworthy. I think there's every evidence that Saudi Arabia would be put in that category. When you have direct evidence and when our own intelligence community has concluded that there is high confidence that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia butchered a dissident with a bone saw in a consulate in a foreign country, you would think that would give us pause as to giving Saudi Arabia or selling Saudi Arabia more weapons. But it's worse than that. We're not only selling Saudi Arabia offensive weapons, we are also talking about giving them nuclear technology. Now, the nuclear technology, they say, is only for energy. But you got to wonder, a country that sits atop one of the largest oil reserves in the world is now saying, oh, we don't have enough fossil fuel, we need nuclear power. There have been people who have gotten nuclear technology and then have moved on to nuclear weapons. What would possibly be the worst thing to happen to the Middle East would be to have three powers there with nuclear weapons. We've had Iran before. They have the knowledge now to enrich. They made an agreement not to enrich. They're still threatening to enrich uranium. What do you think happens if Saudi Arabia gets nuclear technology and there's any rumor of them progressing on towards developing nuclear weapons? What will Iran do? Automatically, they will do the same thing. It also happens in the conventional weapons arena. So every time we sell or give missiles to Saudi Arabia, what do you think Iran does? They've either got to buy more or make more. It's an arms race. We're feeding both sides of an arms race. But you'll hear people in Washington saying, but Iran they're a malign influence. Well, yeah, so's Saudi Arabia. What do you do when you have two powers that show tendencies towards evil and show tendencies towards acting in ways that are against our national interests? Do we just give blindly weapons to anybody who's opposed to Iran because Iran is a malign influence? Well, what about Saudi Arabia? They've spent $100 billion spreading this radical jihadism to other cultures. $100 billion around the world, preaching hatred of Christians, hatred of Jews, hatred of Hindus, and yet we give them more weapons. There's a madrasa supported by Saudi Arabia. This is a so-called religious school in Pakistan that 80% of the boys that graduate from the school, because of course girls aren't allowed to go to school under this kind of religion, the boys that graduate from the school, 80% of them fight in the Taliban against the United States. Why would we give weapons to a country that teaches hatred of our country and actually trains fighters to fight against our soldiers? What person in what insane world thinks it's a good idea to fund people who fundamentally don't like us? Why in the world do we keep doing this? Last week we voted on sending weapons to Qatar. Do you know who Qatar supplies weapons with? Hamas. I thought we were allies with Israel, but we fund Qatar that sends missiles and weapons to Hamas, who then bombs Israel. Qatar also hosts fundraisers for ISIS. Remember ISIS? The ones chopping people's heads off? Why would we give weapons to countries that give weapons to our enemies? In the Syrian civil war, we went in on the side of those who were opposed to Assad. Now, Assad's no saint, no Democrat, no Jeffersonian Democrat, no believer in freedom, and yet the people on the other side, most of them hate Israel, most of them despise any rights for women, most of them, many of them, are allied with Al-Qaeda. Who's Al-Qaeda? The people who attacked us on 9/11. Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Who did they get weapons from? Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Even Hillary Clinton admitted this in one of the emails that was released where Hillary Clinton is talking to John Podesta by email. She said, we've got to do something about this. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are arming and providing logistical help to ISIS. So why does it go on? Some would say because people make a big profit on this. This is a jobs program for the arms industry, and we got to make sure they make their profit. I disagree. This is an industry that uniquely has to do with our national interest. It's uniquely paid for by the taxpayer. These weapons are owned by the taxpayer, and we should not sell them to people who are not our friends. This is what the debate's about today. We will vote shortly on whether or not we should sell offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. What are they doing with the weapons? Well, they're bombing civilians in Yemen, for one. They're transferring some of the weapons in Yemen to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, who attacked us, or the larger umbrella group that attacked us on 9/11, is active. They're called AQAP in Yemen. There are news reports in the last week that Saudi Arabia is indiscriminately giving arms to anybody who's opposed to the group that they're fighting against, the Houthis. Who supports the Houthis? The Iranians. Is one side better than the other? Are we so blind to the malign influence of Saudi Arabia that we just give money and weapons to anybody regardless of what they do? You can chop up a dissident. You can cut a dissident into pieces with a bone saw and we'll still give you weapons? My goodness, I can't imagine. I do not think the people in this body who will vote to continue to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia are listening to the people at home. I guarantee you, if we asked the people at home, if we had a national poll and every voter got to give their opinion, how many people at home do you think are saying, oh, well, they just chopped up a dissident, no big deal, let's keep sending them weapons? Or, oh, well, they're giving weapons to Hamas, yeah, we don't really care. Or, oh, well, they're bombing civilians. The Saudis killed 150 people at a funeral procession, people marching at a funeral procession. They knew it was a funeral procession. This is no fog of war. This is no mistake. This was an intentional act to kill people at a funeral procession. 150 people were killed, 450 were wounded. About a year ago, they killed 40 school children on a school bus. They are indiscriminately bombing civilian centers. They are blockading Yemen, which is one of the poorest countries on the planet. Millions of people, some estimate between 14 and 17 million people, live on the edge of starvation because of this war. The Saudis are preventing food from coming in. They have blockaded Hodeidah, which is one of the key ports where food needs to come in. Yemen imports 80% of their food. The Saudis are blockading them and people are starving, and we are allied with Saudis. We supply them with bombs that they drop on civilians, and until the last few months, we were refueling the very planes that were dropping the bombs. People talk sometimes about, a dream of peace in the Middle East. If you want to have a peace plan in the Middle East, people say, that's Israel and Palestine have to come to a peace agreement. You know what the bigger problem, even bigger than that conundrum, which is a conundrum? It's trying to figure out how to have peace between Saudi Arabia and their allies and Iran. Everything around here is Iran, 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 Iran. Do you know who spends the third most amount of money on the military in the world? Saudi Arabia. It's the United States. We spend more than the next 10 countries combined. We spend more than all the rest of NATO combined, for that matter. So it's the United States, then a distant second is China, and then there's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia spends more on their military than Russia, more than most of our NATO allies. And yet people say, we got to give them more arms because Iran's a bad actor. Well, what if they're both bad actors? Currently, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf sheikdoms that surround them spend 8 times more than Iran. Now, I'm not saying Iran is this great place or that the government's great. What I'm saying is when you have 2 bad actors, when you have 2 malign influences, do you think we really always have to choose the lesser of 2 evil? Do we always have to look, askance and say, whatever, as long as we're doing something that is opposed to Iran? One of our other so-called allies over there is Bahrain. We have a naval base there, and we say, it's important to have a naval base, so we have to look the other way. They have 4,000 political prisoners. Saudi Arabia actually imprisons people for political reasons, and they don't just kill them, they behead them and crucify them. I think in that order. They put the bodies out for public display. They executed a guy named Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, who was of a minority religion. The Saudis are Sunnis. This guy was a Shia religious person and a spokesman. He was executed. His nephew is being held in prison, has been for several years now. He was 17 when he was arrested, in his crime, sending a text message to encourage people to protest against the regime, the authoritarian regime of Saudi Arabia. So really, I think the problem here is some people have come to the conclusion that arms are always good and we should never do anything to condition the sale of arms to behavior. Boy, I'm not for sending more arms over there, period, because it's a cauldron always just threatening to boil over. But let's say you or someone who said, oh, no, we've got to arm them. Perhaps we should condition arms on good behavior. Perhaps if you are cutting up a dissident with a bone saw in a foreign country, maybe we should stop arms for a while to see if maybe you can get better people in your government, or maybe to see if your ways will change. Saudi Arabia said, oh, we're doing it differently now. We're not going to fund radical jihadism around the world. But they've spent $100 billion infecting the world with the ideas of hatred of the West, hatred of Christians, hatred of Jews, and hatred of Hindus. There used to be a couple hundred of these schools in Pakistan. There's now said to be 20,000 schools in Pakistan. The Saudis support schools, not just in Pakistan, throughout the world, Indonesia, India, all over the Middle East. They support these schools that teach intolerance and hatred of the West. And yet we're one of their biggest arms suppliers. It makes utterly no sense, and it should be reconsidered. We will have a chance to vote today, and the numbers are growing. When I first introduced a resolution to disapprove of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, I think I got 22 votes. We did it again a couple of months later, I think we got in the 40s. I think there's a chance today that we get close to 60 votes. We'd have to get to 67 to overcome a presidential veto. And look, I'm a big fan of the president on many fronts, but on this, someone's got to stand up, even a member of his own party, and say, arms sales are not jobs programs, and they should be conditioned on behavior, and we should not sell arms to countries who hate us. These countries that burn our flag and chant death to America, we shouldn't be arming them. At one point in time, there were reports that ISIS, you remember the people that were beheading people in the desert in the last couple of years, the people that were spreading throughout the region, there were reports that they had $1 billion worth of American Humvees. Some of them they captured, but some of them became because of this indiscriminate arms, just arms everywhere. So when we had the Syrian civil war going on, all throughout the news media, public and private and everywhere, everybody was saying Saudi Arabia and Qatar are giving arms to anybody, indiscriminately giving arms to people. One of the groups that got arms, and one of the ones that got anti-tank weapons, these are shoulder-launched missiles, said in a news report right after they got them, they said, well, when we're done with Assad, they didn't even talk about ISIS. Most of them didn't care about ISIS because they actually kind of agreed with ISIS's religion. They said, when we're done with Assad, we're going to go after Israel next. So we're arming people that are potential, if not real, enemies of Israel. We're arming people that teach hatred of the West, hatred of Christians, hatred of Hindus, hatred of Jews. And we're arming these people. Why would we do that? Let's say you don't even agree with everything I've said, but you say, well, maybe we should try to get them to behave better. Why don't you withhold arms for 6 months at the least? Why don't we just stop for a while? They already have so many arms. They got enough arms to blow up the Middle East 10 times over. Is there just no stopping? Is there no limitation to what we'll do? Do we not believe that any of our arms sales should be conditioned on behavior? This is a big deal and a big vote. And it's my hope that the American people will watch how people vote and decide, is this who I want representing me? Do I want someone representing me who's selling arms to people who hate our country? To people who spend hundreds of billions of dollars on schools teaching hatred of our country? Do I want to have people representing me who continue to flood the Middle East with arms? That's what this vote is about. And I hope the American public will pay attention to how people vote today and to which direction they want the country to go in. We've had enough war. This is something I agree with the president on. We've had enough war. We've been at war too long, in too many places. We've been 19 years in Afghanistan. To what end? I was for the initial purpose of getting those who attacked us on 9/11. I would have voted to go. But after 19 years, it's nation building. We're spending $50 billion a year. We build roads, they blow them up. We build schools, they blow them up. We got roads and schools crumbling in our country. We don't have an extra $50 billion to spend in Afghanistan. We're $1 trillion short this year. We're going to spend $4 trillion and we bring in $3 trillion. Not really great economics, not great budget balancing effort on our part. So one, we can't afford to try to be everywhere all the time. But number two, the money we're spending overseas is counterproductive. You see, we went into Iraq and toppled a dictator, and what did we get? Chaos. In the chaos, we get ISIS and other groups forming. We went into Libya and toppled the dictator in Libya, and what did we get? Chaos. It's now so confusing in Libya that I'm not even sure which side the U.S. government is supporting. They were supporting the UN-sanctioned government, and now they appear to be supporting military generals that are trying to overthrow that government. One thing's for sure, the country of Qatar, that we voted to send arms to last week, is supporting the side opposite us. So we give arms to people who are directly involved in a civil war where we're involved on the other side of the civil war. To me, it seems utterly preposterous that we keep doing that. Between Qatar's support for the other side in Libya, their support for Hamas, they're letting ISIS and Al-Qaeda do fundraising in their country. Maybe we need to take a break from the arms race in the Middle East. I don't think that you can make a practical or reasonable argument that there's been more peace since we've sent more weapons over there. They've got plenty of weapons to kill each other for another 1,000 years. They've been killing each other for 1,000 years. They got enough weapons to kill each other for another 1,000 years. Maybe we don't need to be involved in every civil war in the world. Maybe we can't afford it, and maybe when we've gotten involved, we've had the unintended consequences of actually making it worse. People have this idea that you topple a dictator and somehow the next person they elect is going to be Thomas Jefferson. Well, guess what? Every time we've toppled a dictator, the people they end up electing, it's not Thomas Jefferson. In fact, sometimes when they have elections, we don't like who they elected in the elections, and people go back in and topple them again. So when Egypt actually had an election, they elected somebody from the Muslim Brotherhood. Many in the Middle East and many in our country didn't want it, so we helped to get rid of him. So now we have a military rule with no elections and with the idea that you can be detained without trial. But people say, well, it's stable and it's another military autocracy, but we're going to put up with it. I think we need to rethink our approach to the Middle East. I think we need to rethink the approach that we always have to arm one or both sides in every war. We need to rethink whether regime change is a good idea. And we need to look at the practical effects of our foreign policy and say, are we safer somehow? I think the one thing that is universally true is that we're usually poorer by the time we're done, because what we end up doing is spending good money after bad. I'll give you a couple of examples in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we spent $90 million on a luxury hotel in downtown Kabul. And you say, well, how does a $90 million hotel protect us? Well, it doesn't, but it's money, and money's just running through all of this. Somebody's getting rich, but not the American taxpayer. So the guy that built it was, I think it was a Jordanian national, but he built a shell of a hotel. He took the $90 million, he got all the payment, but it was never built. So it mostly doesn't have walls and none of the rooms are completed. But it's now a danger because it sits across the street from our embassy and snipers crawl up in the building. And so the thing is we ask you for $90 million, we need more now, because apparently we need to tear it down because it's now a danger to our embassy and our soldiers. So if we could just get $200,000 more. They're going to spend money. They're going to spend another couple $100,000 tearing down the hotel that we asked you to build in the first place, which we had no business building whatsoever. We built a gas station for them in Afghanistan too, but because our purpose in the military is now sometimes to fight the enemy, but also to fight climate change. You didn't know this, but that's part of the military's goal is climate change now. So we built them a gas station, but we want to reduce the carbon footprint, and so we got a gas station that sells natural gas. Well, the problem was, one, nobody in Afghanistan has a car. The average income is about $800. Almost nobody's got a car. No one's got one, burns natural gas. And so what they did is They had to give them credit cards, and they had to buy them cars that actually run on natural gas. We wanted to visit when we were over there, and the military said it was too dangerous to take us there. So we have no idea whether it's even in operation at this point. But I'd say we need to rethink it, and I urge today a vote against selling more arms to Saudi Arabia. Thank you.